What's up and welcome back. I'm John Stark from MacTheMovieGuy.com, your favorite blind film critic, and today this is a series review of Mr. McMahon. It's available on Netflix. It has audio description by Descriptive Video Works, written by Jeff Heck, and narrated by Diane Newman. So, this is a show that they obviously were doing it for a reason at a time period, and then things changed. This is one of those like serendipitous things where you happen to be interviewing somebody. I think it's not kind of really what happened with the Jinx, is that they were interviewing that guy and then he said some stuff and they got it on camera and they got it on tape. And I think that was sort of the thing that blew up about that was like, oh shit, wow, we weren't planning on that, but okay. Uh, well, Mr. McMahon was something that obviously this team had been looking into, doing an interview with Vince McMahon, and this is from an angle of how he built the WWE. So he's very participatory for the majority of the documentary. There's tons of interview footage with him. But as soon as those sexual uh, misconduct allegations of various varieties come about, he's out. He pulled, and they remind you of that the majority of the interviews were conducted prior to the allegations against Vince McMahon. Um, so they don't really talk about it until episode 6. So if you're waiting for the thing, it kind of just it goes through like the passage of time and the WWE/WWF, which is what it used to be called, and how he built the WWF into the WWE, and how they had to fight their rivals like the WCW. And for somebody like me who does not watch wrestling at all, at all, at all, at all. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a fucking wrestling match in my life. I see clips of them and I'm just like, or I see it in movies. I see like representations of wrestling. So I just want you to know that if you're not a wrestling fan, you can enjoy this documentary. It's actually really well put together and done for a documentary, and there are cuts and pretty much everybody's involved here. The one person that I noticed that was missing was The Rock, and they also don't really bring him up that much. He's lightly brought up, but like I noticed that like two of their biggest stars who ended up transitioning into movies, obviously Dwayne Johnson and the other one being John Cena. John Cena is here. He does not speak much. He's towards the end, and he is very sparsely used. So obviously he did not give them the kind of grand ammunition or big thoughts that they were looking for him to necessarily be tied to this for the rest of his life. But some of the other wrestlers are all over this. Hulk Hogan is all over this. He's all over this. I was familiar with most of the wrestlers because I've always known people who like wrestling, and when I was in high school, people were all about certain wrestlers, and I sort of remember some of them from that. Stone Cold Steve Austin was really big for around my time. So I remembered him, even though I only have like passing knowledge of him. He's not somebody who's really like, I think he's done some film work, but not like enough for me to necessarily know who that is. Like I know who Triple H is because I think again he's done like a film. Uh, I used to have kids that ran around and did that DDT thing, Diamond Dallas, whatever his name is. Is it DDP or isn't it Diamond Dallas Page? Or they like crossed, they did like a thing and then crushed it on their knee. And just so I was expecting everybody to be like, well, the Diamond Dallas phase was. They didn't really talk about that. I remember when the guy climbed and the stunt failed. They talk about that. That's here. Corey Hart, is that right? Bret Hart's younger brother? Question mark. Anyway, yeah, this is a lot of knowledge. 95% of it picked up just from this documentary alone. You know what I didn't know? I didn't know Vince McMahon had kids. Like, I've seen Linda McMahon like in interviews before, but I actually didn't know he had kids. That is how uninvolved I am in wrestling. Is two people who have been around, I guess, for quite some time and been really involved in WWE. I have no idea who they are. So, I so my opinion is that of somebody who doesn't watch wrestling. Did I feel like I learned something here? Sure. I mean, it's a docuseries. You should feel like after watching a docuseries that you learn something. Pretty much that's what they're all trying to do. All documentaries are trying to educate you on some level about something that you knew nothing about before. That's why they are docus in the first place, is because they usually rely somewhere in fact and truth. Even the ones that are just passively watching something happen, they're still passing on truth, not fiction, theoretically. I don't know what Dinesh D'Souza is doing, but it's not docu anything. It's something else. But this is pretty much just allowing people to speak for themselves, and it doesn't really guide the narrative. It just it uses the passage of time as the guiding narrative. So if you're trying to be like, well, this is unfairly looking at the WWE, and it makes it look like, it actually doesn't make the WWE look like anything. It has a fair amount of opinions coming from everywhere about their time in the WWE, and it talks about the battle between two different groups and where everybody stands. And Vince has plenty of time to comment, and they give him the time of day just exactly like it seems like they were planning on doing all the way until the final episode. So the final episode is the one where he speaks for a little bit, and then they're like, oh, well, the allegations, and they're like, well, after the allegations, Vince McMahon stopped doing interviews. So yeah, then they kind of have to wrap up the series without him, and they have to directly address the allegations, because there isn't really an ending to the series, because Vince McMahon doesn't really get to offer his final thoughts on this. I think about sort of even the time period of the interviews, because I think one of the allegations comes out in 2022. It's like 2024. This docuseries came out in September of 2024. I'm like, how long were you making this docuseries? Because basically you're saying that like you were interviewing Vince McMahon up until 2022. And then, so like for 2 years you sat on this? Like, I feel like there's a point where were you waiting for like to see if more would happen so you could include it? Or were you afraid of releasing it at a certain time? I'm so intrigued now about the release gap that they would have had, because anybody else would have tried to pump this out. It's like when we had the whole GameStop thing, like everybody was trying to make a GameStop documentary and get it out, because they were like, well, we know this is only going to be hot for like 5 seconds. So if we don't make a documentary about it right now, so a whole bunch of like things were rushed out as soon as possible. Same thing happened with, like a Ghislaine Maxwell documentary. I mean, that really has sort of like a little bit of a time frame on it. And Jeffrey Epstein and those kind of people, you want to release it in the window in which people are thinking and talking about that kind of stuff. You don't want to release it like 2 years after, but they kind of waited. And I feel like had this been released even a year ago, what would the effect have been? But now they're just releasing it, and it's just sort of like, it feels kind of like, why did you wait? It's a documentary. It's not, there are no visual effects here. You can't be like, well, we had to wait for the VFX team to complete their work. This isn't fucking Avatar. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't understand the massive gap in time, but I like the series. Jeff Heck did a really good job of writing the narration here. I know he probably thinks he doesn't because it's a docu-series and there's really not much you can do, because when you get into like the world of talking heads, where you have a whole bunch of people who have been interviewed and they just keep going like one after the other, and you're letting those people tell the story, and there's no person here. There's no central narrative force. Like I said, time is what guides the documentary and pulls it forward. They start somewhere and they end at somewhere. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's time, passage of time. But one of the things that I really liked is the fact that over the course of 6 episodes, because we speak to so many different people, even though some of these people are well known, even there are blind wrestling fans, by the way, and because the show does have audio description. So shout out, thank you to the WWE for supporting audio description, and or whoever airs you that decides to put audio description on you. But blind wrestling fans do get to watch this stuff on TV, so there are people who are probably going to recognize some of these wrestlers' voices, but not everybody here is a wrestler. So I don't know. And there are so many wrestlers over the course of the passage of time that it's like, maybe if you started watching wrestling later on, are you going to necessarily know the wrestlers from the 80s by their voices? It just depends on how old you are. So what we do get is we get check-ins, and a lot of documentaries will tell you who somebody is, and then they'll never tell you again. So it's like you get that one introduction, and you're like, well, I guess I have to memorize that voice for the rest of the documentary. I hate those. I mean, thank you at least for telling me who somebody was, but my God, when you start getting like 20 different people involved in a documentary, and you're like, I know you told me at the beginning, but I'm lost. That voice sounds like this voice. They sound like the same person. It happens to me all the time in real life. I always tell, people at work, I'm like, always just come up to me. It's a good idea to just be like, hey, it's me. Because you have no idea. It's like, I may know you, but you have no idea how close somebody else sounds like to you until you've really experienced it. And you're like, oh my God, that could be either this person or this person. And sometimes I find myself standing there trying to talk to somebody in real life and be like, just like generic questions and try to feel them out and be like, which one is this? I'm talking to one or two people here. Shit. How do I figure this one out? So, but I can't do that with a TV series. I can't interact with it and be like, who am I talking to? Who is this? Who are you, sir? So I just have to kind of roll with it. Luckily, we have name check-ins. So I'm going to give it props for that. I know there's probably plenty of wrestling footage that they feel like they couldn't describe because somebody's talking over it. But at the same time, I don't know that you're necessarily here for wrestling footage. I mean, maybe in some certain scenes you're here for that, but I feel like an actual wrestling match, otherwise this would just be sort of like a random greatest hits clips of just random wrestling footage. It's not, these aren't, they talk about some highlights and they're like, well, this was a really iconic moment for WWE. And I'm like, okay. And they kind of stop for that moment and we kind of get that moment. But otherwise, I'm sure there's some stuff I'm sure not everybody is like, it's their face when they're talking. I'm sure that there's probably some stuff that they talk over. So, yeah, I did. I liked the series. It does have to talk about it at the end. So if you're some sort of like WWE purist who, I don't know, believes Vince McMahon got, I don't know, false accusations or something, and you're very upset about it, then maybe that'll throw you. But you should at least be able to get through 5 episodes, because again, it'll remind you that the thing is coming. But like I said, it's not like every single episode they're like, well, this was true until he raped somebody. It's just, no, it's not really. Like everything comes linearly. There are some other allegations along the way, but they happen sort of as they happen, like within the time period that they happen. So they don't bring up the later stuff until it actually needs to be brought up at the end when we reach the point. So I watched it. I watched 6 episodes. And I like watching stuff like this because now I have maybe a slightly more passing knowledge of wrestling than I did before. I knew most of the names of the wrestlers. There wasn't really a wrestler here. I didn't feel like they pulled out from the trenches like a whole bunch of D-list like roster talent. So the only one that I was noticeably missing was The Rock. Obviously turned this down and was like, nope. Wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Yeah, so he obviously said no, even though they mentioned him because obviously he was a pro wrestler. There was at least one of the female wrestlers I didn't know who she was going into this, but basically every other wrestler I had heard of before, thanks to me always knowing somebody who's really into wrestling, or half of these guys having film careers. It's funny to hear Vince McMahon talk about how trepidatious he was about Hulk Hogan's film career. And I'm like, I mean, this is a guy who eventually developed, WWE started producing films with their lead actors in them. I mean, he really he fully leans in at some point in his career, which they didn't fully explore enough. All of the movies that WWE ended up producing, but which is why I know how so many of these people. I'm going to give Mr. McMahon, the documentary, not the person, I'm going to give it an A-. I thought it was pretty good. So, yeah, check it out. It's on Netflix. It has audio description. Good job. Good job, guys. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you guys on the other side.